Pardon me, can I have your attention? We're going to start the final panel. Can everybody hear me? Are the mics on and functioning? Is everybody happy? My name is Warren Alney, and I am the host of the final panel, what's called the closing plenary session, the potentials and prospects, how will the next generation solve California's problems. You've heard about the past, and now we're going to talk about the future. And we have with us people who do indeed represent the next generation, although they all are already off to a fast start, as you will hear when I introduce them. I don't think you have detailed biographies of them. I do, although I won't go into great detail because they are so distinguished it would take a long time and we'd be here for too long if I did that. Let me say just a word about myself. In the discussion I heard earlier about the evolution of California and the evolution of government in California, the metaphor of the dinosaur was used, and if there's a dinosaur on this panel, I have to concede I'm it. Not only because of my age and the fact I've been a reporter in California for 30 years, but I'm actually a member of a species of dinosaur. My great-grandfather was the mayor of Oakland around the turn of the century. My grandfather was on the state Supreme Court. My father worked for many years for Earl Warren when he was district attorney, attorney general, governor, and then later in Washington as well. So I'm a member of that generation that has a lot to account for as we move into the next century and for the problems that we're going to deliver to the next generation. And that's one of the issues that we want to hear about from them, as well as this a general overriding question that I guess is going to be important to you all next year, and that is what is it going to mean to be a citizen in the 21st century, an era of biomedical advances and the global economy and extraordinary communications technology and all of those changes that we know, or we think at least, are going to occur. Let me say just a brief word about each of our panelists, and I'm going to take them alphabetically for lack of a better way to do it. To my immediate left is Patrick Boren. He is graduated from CSUS in 1984. Has worked professionally in California campaigns, was a field representative for Assemblywoman Bev Hansen, field representative also for Senator Maurice Johansson, and is now an elected member of the Robla Elementary School Board, up for re-election this year, as I understand it. And he was also employed by the Rio Linda Elementary School District. Jason Hodge is down at the end. Jason, at age 21, was elected to the Board of Education of the City of Oakland. That was in 1996. He is currently a third-year undergraduate student at the University of California at Berkeley, where he is majoring in English. He plans to attend law school and return to the Oakland public schools as a teacher. He is a volunteer in teen counseling and other kinds of community work. He is interested in the economic and social progress of young black males in particular. He serves on 3 standing committees of the Board of Education: Student Services and Safety Committee, the Business and Facilities Committee. He's chair of the Personnel Committee of the school board in Oakland. Gloria Romero is currently a Democratic nominee for the 49th Assembly District in the Los Angeles area. She is a member of the Los Angeles Community College District Board of Trustees. She is also a member of the elected Charter Reform Commission in Los Angeles. Those of you who know about the secession movement in Los Angeles know what that means and what that is about. And it's very relevant to some of the issues that came up earlier today also about our current boundaries of jurisdictions, cities, counties, local governments, any longer relevant. Or ought we to be talking about neighborhoods? Ought we to be talking about regions that have some coherence? She's on that board and involved in charter reform. She's a teacher at Cal State LA and a social psychologist as well. Tony Strickland, another nominee. He's running for the Assembly District number 37. He is the Republican nominee, and he is in Thousand Oaks. He's most recently been the legislative director for Assemblyman Tom McClintock. Came from Whittier College, honored there in many ways with leadership and service awards. was the Whittier Republican Women's Federated Nixon Scholar and founded the Richard Nixon Republican Club. He is with the Vice President of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes while he was at Whittier. He also has been the founder and is, rather, I should say, the founder and president of the Southern California Taxpayers Alliance. Excuse my paper shuffling. Celinda Vasquez is to my immediate right, and she is currently the Associated Students President at San Diego State University. She is past chair of the statewide California Students Association. She is a social work major in her 5th year. She is also on the California Student Aid Commission Loan Study Council. Got that right? Mm-hmm. And she is from Los Angeles, one who has moved to San Diego. So that's the panel. As you can see, a very interesting and a group of people who really bode hope, I think, for the future. And we're going to hear some interesting things from them. Let me begin. We're not going to have opening statements of the length that we have on the earlier panels, but rather just 2 or 3 minute statements to sort of get a sense of where everybody's coming from. Then we're going to try to encourage an interchange among you on the panel, and so don't hesitate to speak up, ask each other questions, give your opinions about things as they arise, and I'll try to moderate that process as best I could. And then we're going to go relatively soon to you in the audience. It's my understanding that you've been sitting around long enough, and it's time to participate in this conference. And I know that you all have questions to ask. So let me ask, again, a very general question designed really to just elucidate where each of you is coming from. And the question would be this: what do you think is the major problem in terms of governance in California that you are inheriting from another generation and which you will have to try to deal with in the next generation? And why don't I, for this first one, go alphabetically. So Patrick Boren, you're on.
Okay, thank you. Boy, I happened to turn voting age back when Prop 13 was first on the ballot. So that was my first shot at voting. And being involved in politics at various levels up until now, it's been very frustrating. And from what I hear, I work at the community level. I work in community associations. I try and stay as grassroots as possible. And I think the most complicated issue that we face as we move forward is the system of generating revenue in the state of California. My perspective is that we, as voters, attempted to address what was perceived at the time to be a serious issue, and that was property taxation. And as with most initiatives, it takes a stab at an issue, but it doesn't take a comprehensive approach to solving an issue. And I think from that moment, from when it was passed, although I was a supporter of it, I think from that moment, from when it was passed, I believe there became a real failure on the part of state government to deal with the impacts and then to take the next several steps in which to modify, adjust, fine-tune what it was that the constituency of the state of California was saying. And as I remember, it became a bailout situation pretty much from a get-go, from a state surplus to saying, okay, we're going to take this approach. From that point on, it's my opinion that we've taken Band-Aid approaches and we've sought to skirt the issues, attempting to drive revenue from many other areas. And if you have a complicated problem, you need to take a comprehensive approach. And I think we have failed to do so. And I think that as we go from this point on into the future, the next generation really needs to get a handle on what the priorities are, not just from a soundbite situation, but what the real priorities are and how it is that you're going to fund them on a short-term and long-term basis. And don't just shuffle the shells on the table and make everyone guess where that revenue is being driven from this year and on to next year.
Okay, Patrick Boren, thank you for that. Jason Hodge, you're up next. Same question to you.
Yeah. From my own perspective, I'd say that three of the major things that have that are problematic in the form of governance that we have right now would be, one, disenfranchisement, the belief that the majority rules, which is, I guess, basically the rule, and also an unwillingness to hear really, the non-voting majority. And so, in terms of the form of governance we have right now, it's set up that when you go to the polls, and our system of government basically is run depending on what the majority says. But when you look at the numbers, it's only really a small, portion of the people who aren't really, for whatever the reason, the ones that are, most likely to vote. And I was in on. Had the privilege to sit here during the last panel, and one of the issues that was raised, and I thought it was a very good point, was when you have initiatives that go forth, it's like 209 and 227, when they're passed by either 60% of the electorate or 53%, what happens to that 47% that lost? Those people, while they were not the majority, they're still a large population of people that we have to live with and deal with, and for whatever the reason, they didn't feel like their needs were taken care of. So I think that is definitely one of the major problems that we are gonna have to, as Californians, face as we continue on into the next century, because we all have to live in this society. We all have to educate our kids in this society. We have to work in this society, and we have to live with those people that are not having their needs addressed. And if their needs are not being addressed through the political process and through the process of government, then their needs are going to have to be addressed in some other way. And it may be a legitimate way, or it may be a non-legitimate way, but either way, it's going to impact the quality of the way we live. And so I think that really is a concern that we all have to consider and try to address as we continue on and trying to be a fruitful society. Because if not, then I don't think that we're going in a positive direction right now, as a whole, because the needs of everybody are not being met. We see a continuing gap between the rich and the poor. We're seeing class division in terms of propositions like 187 and 209 and 227, and it's just not a good place for us to be in. We're seeing a gap in things like funding for education, in direct contrast to we're seeing a decrease in funding for education, while the funding for prison industry continues to increase. And so you have to look at those kinds of things and say, why is that happening, and why does it continue to happen when we have a large number of people out here that are specifically affected by those kinds of numbers, and their needs are not being addressed. So I really think that the disenfranchisement is clear. There are a lot of people that are not being brought along. They're not being encouraged to go out and vote. And we have to make an extra effort as people in policy-making positions, and also those in the legislature, to reach out to those people and have them come in and help in the decision-making process. Because, like I said, if we don't involve them in the decision-making process, we're going to have to deal with those people ultimately, and it may not be in a way that is favorable.
Okay, Gloria Romero, again, what is the major problem do you think you're inheriting from this generation that you're going to have to solve in California in the future?
I think there's many that one could take a look at, but I think one in particular, and it follows on the theme of disenfranchisement, is how do we ensure that what we legislate and how we legislate it really does generate access and equity in terms of a California that is increasingly diverse. It's just not the same California any longer. We believe in a democratic majority rule, and yet what happens when the majority who rules, and presumably the voting majority, is not reflective of the populace within California? And I think what we've seen then over the years in California, and some of the legacy that will take us into the 21st century, of the contradictions, whether they be social or economic or educational, linguistic, race-related, have, I think, dealt with this clash of looking at a very simple democratic tenet of majority rule, but in a changing California with a new face of its citizenry, does not always reflect the enfranchisement or the participation of not necessarily the majority vote, but certainly a changing majority in California. I think this is a real challenge we'll have to address.
Tony Strickland, you're up.
Well, I think what we need to do is take a look at a generation ago. If you look at when Governor Pat Brown was governor here in California, you look at where we were. We were the envy of the world in terms of education. We were offering a free university education to anybody who wanted one. Look at highways. We were building highways faster than Detroit was building cars. And we did it, if you look at it, for a much lower rate for inflation-adjusted dollars. What we need to do is be more efficient in government. And right now, government, I feel, is just too big. I believe California has become an economic development agency for states like Nevada and Arizona. Think about it. People are leaving this state to go to the middle of the desert. Why? Because I think our California regulation problem and our business problem is that we're overtaxed and overregulated. So people are leaving this state to go to Nevada and Arizona where they want business. I was in a conference, an ALEC conference with Governor 517 of Arizona at the time, and they asked him one simple question: what's your secret? Why is your economy booming? He had one answer: the California legislature. He's all, and true, he said the California legislature. And that's why I got involved in politics and why I want to change. I want to make California a business, a pro-business state, to keep more jobs here and flourish. And I think a classic example of this is the recent car registration tax proposal. If you look at the history of the car tax, it was instilled for road maintenance and road construction. But if you look at it now, not one single penny is used for road maintenance or road construction. It goes right into the general fund. And in 1991, when we couldn't balance the budget up in Sacramento, they stole and raided that localities' money, the counties and the cities. And in order to pay them back, we gave them part of the revenue from the car tax. Now, I venture to say, when we have a $4.4 billion surplus, if we can't give taxpayers more money in what they earn, we never will. And that's something we have to take a look at. And again, if you look at a generation ago, Pat Brown offered a free education to anybody who wanted one. We're the envy of the world in terms of K through 12 education. We built highways faster than Detroit was building cars, and we did it for a lot less.
Celinda Vasquez.
Well, my perspective also goes along with the theme of the disenfranchised, and along the same lines as what Jason mentioned. The initiatives that I've seen come through the process have been very, very overwhelming for me as a Latina student, and the population is changing in California, and I think that the majority versus minority politics is really interesting, because as California is changing and the population demographics are changing, we still see that policies and different initiatives are not reflective of what's going on and the needs that are not being met of the minority, if you will. Another problem that I have, a big problem that I faced in the 12th grade when I started doing research on this, was the gap in funding for higher education. In particular, the prison funding versus the higher education funding. Our prison system is receiving large amounts of funding from the state. However, our CSU system and the UC is not growing at the same rate, and that to me is a very big problem. As a student and as a Latina student, I feel that the initiatives that have come through the state of California for the population to vote on has been one of a disenfranchised mint.
Wow. We've heard a lot from these people. We could spend a lot of time just with these folks, it seems to me, talking about problems current and future. Let me put another general question to all of you and let you answer it in whatever order you want. It would be this: that it is often said that your generation is poorly educated in matters having to do with government. Obviously, that's not true of you, and it's not the fault of students if they're not appropriately educated, but it's often said that's the case with your generation. Consequently, apathy is ascribed to you and disinterest in government. How are you going to tackle these extraordinarily difficult questions that you have raised? Priorities and spending. Are we going to spend it on education? Are we going to spend it on prisons? Equity in terms of how the system works when the voting population is so different from the population as a whole. How are we going to get people to agree to tax themselves to pay for services that go to other people? All of these issues have been raised either directly or implicitly by all of you. Who wants to be first on that? How do you get the will to make the kinds of changes that you think are necessary? Build a constituency.
Well, I'll jump out.
Go ahead.
In working with community groups, it's very frustrating at times to get people to mobilize. When it hits a person's home life, personal interest, you can motivate people, you can move people, you can generate crowds. And when another issue that you may perceive as being equally as relevant, but they cannot put it into perspective as to how it relates to them, it's just very difficult to move them, to motivate them. I've always heard people are motivated most by their pocketbooks. And in this case, I think it goes beyond that. I think that people are, as we've heard about the disenfranchisement of individuals, I think if you feel left out of the system, you're going to have two very diverse approaches. Either you're going to jump in and you're going to rectify a situation of injustice, or you're going to check out of the system. And I deal in neighborhoods and with folks that have checked out of the system, that when you talk to them, you'll find that in these poor neighborhoods that we live in, that they understand that the fiscal impact, and a lot of times I find very fiscally conservative neighborhoods, and yet they really understand that the need for people to help people and government to be compassionate. And yet, when they're fighting on a daily basis to move up the ladder and to deal with the gang issues, deal with the deteriorating neighborhoods, they've got their plate full. And it's really hard to motivate people to take action when they feel as if there is little recourse for them, little impact. And that's what I see on a daily basis that I'm dealing with and trying to get people involved and motivated.
So who else wants to tackle this? How do you deal with this?
I know that as far as students are concerned, when you let them know how much of their fees are going where, they get interested very quickly. However, I agree with you. I would say that when it hits you personally, that's when you are able to go out and recruit and mobilize, in particular in my case with students. But one interesting thing that I was reading on the way over here was a publication put out by the American College Personnel Association, and it was talking about student politics and student activism, and the level of activism, it is very different today than it was in the late 60s. However, the rate is actually the same. There was 28% of students were active in the late 60s, and now we're seeing that 25% of students are active today. Another thing is that the trend on campuses is also changing. The political climate has shifted, whereas the traditional groups that were in power are no longer the groups that are in power today. You're seeing more gender-based politics, and also the ethnic groups are also becoming very involved. And I think that in my personal situation, I did see that there was something wrong in my neighborhood growing up in Inglewood, and wondering why things were so screwed up, that I wanted to get involved. And I think that's what it takes for students. In particular, in my situation, I have to tell students, you pay $70-some to the Associated Students. Don't you want to know who you vote for? So I think that's what it takes.
Well, I'd like to just take one study I looked at is Generation X, my generation, believes more in UFOs than they'll see a single dime out of Social Security. I think it's frightening. Things we have to do. Obviously, all of us here on this panel, are involved in government because we want to see a better government. One of the things I do is walk door to door to folks. I walked 10,000 homes in the primary, and pretty much the best representative government, and the best representative is that is of one who listens to the problems of the people. And a lot of times you get a lot of information from those people and understand really what the problems are in a community. Let me just give you an example. Walking in Moore Park, they weren't talking about 227, they weren't talking about 209. What they were talking about is a public safety issue where in their neighborhood they had trucks flying by at 80 miles per hour in their main surface street to try to go around a checkpoint. And it might be different in every neck of the woods. I mean, what's different, that's why I believe less government is better government, and government closest to the people is best for the people. Someone in Washington, D.C., someone in Sacramento might not know the problems of Moore Park. I might not know the problems that are necessary in Yolo County or downtown Los Angeles. But that's why we have a representative government. That's why we need less government, and that's why we need government closest to the people. We need those representatives in the baseball fields, in the soccer fields, the football fields, in your local supermarket. That's the best representative government, and that's what our founding fathers wanted, and that's what we need to fight for.
Okay. From down at this end, anybody want to go ahead?
Actually, I was born in the middle of a desert. It's not that bad. The Mojave Desert in California. So for all us desert people, it is an exciting place. I just had to throw that in. That's a hard question in many ways, and I think you could address it from many different vantage points, as we're going to hear. But when we talk about the will to build, again, too, I think that we have to take a look at various types of will. We can talk about goodwill and we can talk about wedge will. And I think that we have seen both in recent years in California. And I think we're going to see it more, and it's going to be more and more of a challenge as we move forward, especially as we move from making law in California more from legislative issues as moving towards the initiative process. And I think we are going to see this issue of will to change. Again, it goes back, I think, to what I raised when we began, and that's again too, looking at the majority rule. What does it mean in a very different, in a very changing California? I think we can find the example of a goodwill and also the wedge will. I think that ultimately, depending upon if and we probably all think we're all for the good of it, but regardless of how it's ultimately analyzed in terms of the will that comes forward, to me the key again is coalition building. It's coalitions. And I think we've seen some very exciting transformations with respect to looking at the varieties of coalitions that can be formed and have been formed in California to bring about changes. I also think, too, in terms of trying to effect an electorate or a grassroots basis, is again to whom do we pay attention to? And more, as we've seen a change in California, we've seen some of the impacts of a majority rule and a creation of, I believe, a very disenfranchised pocket in California. I think we've begun to see more and more grassroots organizing to make sure that access and equity is given to those who've been left out. I think a very good example of this is the Bus Riders Union in Los Angeles. These are Los Angeles County, for the most part, poor people, minorities, very transit dependent. Took on the most powerful, I shouldn't say the most, but one of the most powerful agencies, the MTA. People thought it's crazy. You can't fight the MTA. Guess what? You can fight the MTA, sue them, take them to court, and as we speak, there's been some interesting decisions being made. Bus riders, and this is a group in Los Angeles County, but we've got bus riders throughout California who organize. Attention was paid, resources were given, and again, too, you could take a basic issue of transportation and begin to take on one of the most powerful agencies in certainly LA County, but we can look at it statewide. So I think it's again a combination of looking at the coalitions that are built and to whom do we pay attention. And as we move into a 21st century California, who we pay attention to, I believe, is going to be a critical aspect of seeing or projecting the type of changes that we can envision for California.
Jason, you want to add something about this issue of how do you build a constituency to, given all that we've heard, to accomplish the kind of changes that you think are necessary?
Okay, just in short, I would just say that in terms of the constituency, I think that the will is already there, because when you, time and time again, when polls are taking, one of the number one issue amongst voters in California is education, and an increase in funding for education and an improvement in the quality of education that our kids get. But at the same time, while our legislators continue to say that is a top priority, I just don't see that in the voting patterns. I just, as a member of the Board of Education for Oakland Schools, I and my colleagues were all really sweating to basically see whether or not we were going to actually get a November, bond measure for modernization of our schools, and it came down to the wire, and we were really fearful that we wouldn't get that. And I don't think that we should be put through that every year when, all across the state of California, we have schools that are basically falling apart. And I think that we can't always continue to blame it on Prop 13. I think that, there are a lot of other funding sources that can be tapped into if we really care about the education of our kids. So, no, I think that, the focus of voters is on education, It's just, you know, the basic fact is that our legislators just simply, while they know that, they don't always agree with it, because, you know, I think that many are, you know, I think that if you take a survey of the people in this room and ask them why is it that, you know, the prison industry is booming while, you know, education is you know, the way it is, why funding for that continues to either remain the same or decrease. And I think that probably more than 60 to 75% of the people in here would come back with the answer that, well, you know, the prison industry, the unions that represent the employees of the prisons are some of the largest contributors to our governor and then many of our legislators. And so, you know, we all realize, I think, what the answer is. You know, I think that many of our legislators are tied to special interest groups, and we have to, as a population, sit down and say, what are we going to do about it? When are we going to start holding our elected officials accountable to say, we want you to start addressing our concerns and not the concerns of the special interest groups, because for too long we've seen where that kind of a relationship has been damaging to, you know, basically the major populace of people. So I think those relationships have to be stopped. And they're not going to stop until we as voters make them stop and start holding our leaders accountable, and not continue to send these people back to office when we see that they are openly tied to special interest groups. Because, you know, a lot of these people don't hide the fact that they take all these monies from these groups. They push things like 3 strikes and you're out, which, and then they turn around and say, well, yes, I took money from the prison industry. I supported the 3 strikes law, which basically then resulting in an increase in funding for prisons, because you can't have 3 strikes without more prisons. And they admit to these relationships, and then we still don't do anything. So we as a body have to basically sit down and start holding our officials accountable, and basically ourselves decide what is it that we're going to do.
In this state that is increasingly so diverse economically, culturally, racially, and in so many other ways, do you all see yourselves as representatives of one or a collection, a coalition of interest groups against the rest, or do you see yourselves as part of a whole where your interests are all in collective values and decision making? Is that a clear question? Who wants to take that one?
I actually would like to. The first thing that came to mind was when I was actually running for my position at San Diego State for the student body. One of the things that was told to me was like, well, you're not representative of this population at San Diego State. And I said, what? I pay the same fees that any other student does. So I think that I do consider myself as part of the whole. However, I understand that my background is different, and that my goals may be different, but as far as representing the students at San Diego State, I thought it was very interesting that some students believe that because I was a Latina and because I was actually a woman, that I wasn't going to be representative, or I could not go out and reach out and coalition build. So I find that very interesting, actually, and that was something that was very frustrating for me. And then I turned the question around and said, if I see that man that is running for an office, do I think he's representing me? And it's actually, I turned it around and I said, sometimes I say, oh, no, you know, that guy, he doesn't know where students are coming from, or he doesn't know what women have to go through. So I thought, I didn't think it was so unfair that that student did question my my ability to be representative, but I think that I do see myself and the student leaders that I have been able to work with as a part of a bigger picture. Particularly in California, the population is changing, and so I think I have an advantage that I am bilingual, and that that I do come from a different background, but I think that I use that to my advantage to I don't want to say educate, that may sound condescending, but to I don't want to say help either, but to just have a different perspective in politics in the state of California. And I think that being involved with student politics has definitely opened my eyes to a larger picture.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else interested in that one?
Well, I want to say, I warned in advance that I always have an opinion on something. I'll jump right in and say it. This is an opportunity actually for people.
What you said was you normally have to force your opinions on people.
That's right.
You're happy to be asked them.
That's right. Exactly right. You know, for a number of years, my job was in the field is to go out and play to special interest and work those special interests towards the end result of the reelection of the individuals that I work for. And so you're basically a state employee who, in essence, is doing a campaign-related job. Yes, there are times where you're actually fielding the average individual who has a complaint, and you're trying to respond to them and help them. And a certain part of the job was that way. But for the most part, the job was to be proactive and get out there. Where my areas were primarily in agriculture, is to get out into the ag community and get them on board. So get the rice growers on board, get the wine grape growers on board, get out there, because that generates not only votes, because those people have a lot of employees, they have families that need the money, that live off that money, and it has a residual effect. It also generates contributions. You're not taking a check, but that check comes in coming around the election time. And so state capital, I truly believe, is driven by special interest. And I think that's the reason you're unable to get a comprehensive type approach to problems that exist. You're unable to solve social problems, and you're unable to deal with adjusting the financial impact on individuals. If you look at your property tax bill, at least on mine, I have 8 to 10 different assessments on my bill, and oftentimes by agencies that do the same thing. I have 2 flood insurance agencies taxing me.
So back to the major question, though. You see yourself then as somebody who's concerned about the interests of the whole rather than a more parochial kind of orientation?
So I think that representing the whole in that the folks as a whole feel as if they are not included in the system. They can't get a check on what's going on around them. The revenues are coming from all different ways. They know they want to support education, but it's happening, I think, more by special interest type agendas as opposed to what's actually good for the kids. And I think until recently, the initiative process was a way for the folks in the community to fire a shot across the bow and say, hey, reality check, these are some things we're interested in. Now I tend to believe that initiatives are more driven by consultants that are looking to make money and special interest groups. I think they've kind of taken over the initiative process. But it's very frustrating having the feeling as if you're a populist. You're out there working for the average person and unable to affect change in any real comprehensive, coherent way.
Go ahead.
Again, too, I think it's, what constitutes the whole. And I don't know. I think it's constantly changing as well. And I think even if you took all of the parts, however we describe them, it still wouldn't add up to the whole, whatever that is. And even when we disaggregate the parts within themselves vary and differ from themselves. It's a difficult question. But I think, though, that, for example, while I seek to say, and I say I represent a certain district, I would have to be honest with myself and say, but there's something that I advocate for. There are things around which I do feel partisanship. There's a vision that I want to promote. I believe that that is not something shameful. To me, it's part of what we call a representative democracy. And in that sense, then, I think that what we do is, if we say I'm going to represent the whole, which I mean, geographically, I represent the whole. I can talk about myself representing humanity, etc. But in reality, I will go back and I say, I do believe that in the political process, in the electoral process, in the fight for democracy, that there is a vision. And the vision is not necessarily shared by the whole. In fact, it can oftentimes, we can find contradictions that make up that whole. It's a difficult issue, but I think on one hand, while we can strive to say we want the whole to be complete, I think in reality what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, and I see it as part of the democratic system which we are in, we're fighting for visions of what California should be like. And I am under no illusions that some of my views, as wonderful as they may be, are shared by the whole. But they belong on the table, the agenda for California, and I'm wanting at least to be part of a larger whole, to discuss how we can try to make it more complete? It's a hard one. I don't know.
Let me ask a specific question of Jason and a specific question of Tony that I think are related, and then we'll start going to questions from the audience. Jason, you indicated that if people who aren't getting what they need from the voting majority that doesn't represent them, they may find, I forget your term, but illegitimate means to get their needs satisfied. There's an implicit threat in that, and a prediction of a troublesome situation. Other than appealing to that concern, how else can you approach people who you think do have or do control the resources that are needed, the voting majority, if you will, and get their attention and focus it on the concerns that you have?
Okay. I didn't certainly mean that as a threat. I would just say that it was from where I come from.
I said implicit.
Okay.
I didn't mean
no.
it.
No, I would say that from where I come from, because I grew up in Oakland, I would say that it's more a reality than in my own perception. Because
I come from Los Angeles, where in 1992 we had a big demonstration of what you're talking about.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a reality. Yeah. And so I would say that it really would have to be the humanitarian approach, and I think that. In compilation with that, it has to be basically sort of a, you have to lay down what the reality is. You have to lay that down at the face of our, the people who really make those power decisions, and let them know that, we're hurting down here. We don't have an appropriate amount of funding to educate our kids. We don't have the social services around our kids that they need in order to be effective and successful members of society. And, we have to call them on the carpet and say, hey, what are you going to do about it? I think we're actually very fortunate in Alameda County that we really have some representatives, from my perspective, that are really concerned about education. They put that first, and they continue to fight for us. But, in terms of channeling funding into our district to help with our kids, because, the educational and social services are really what's needed, and that's what it's going to take. So, from my perspective, I think that's really what it's going to be. We have to basically be in the face of our members of the legislature and let them know that these are the things that we need. What are you going to do to help us to get these things? Because I think you'd be surprised, at least I have been from the time that I've served on the board, how many times districts and individuals just don't really voice those concerns because they feel so far apart from the form of government that we have and so disenfranchised that, their requests are not even made. The concerns that they have or the needs that they have are not even taken through the proper channels. And one of the reasons is they don't know how. Government is such a big white elephant to so many people that they just don't know, how to access those channels to have a voice, really. So I think that, first of all, we have to give people a voice and let them know you have that voice. And then let the legislators know that, hey, this is the voice, this is what we're saying, this is what we need. What are you going to do to address these needs and these concerns? Because, ultimately, they're really there to represent us. And, you're going to find very few that just come out and say flat out no. If you've got concerns and problems, and then, there's got to be some middle ground, some compromise that have to be made to get those concerns addressed.
So, Tony, this question to you. It's so difficult in this society that we now live in for some people to see other people and what's happening with them. The point was made on one of the earlier panels that if you live in Los Angeles County, you're asked to pay tax for parks that somebody else's kids are going to play in that don't really have anything to do with you, and yet if you don't pay that tax, they're not going to have any parks. And consequences could be dire beyond the humane considerations. What about that? And what responsibility do we all have then?
Well, see, that's why I believe in local control. I think if we left it within local control, we can stay within our means and keep money home locally, so it doesn't have to go to Washington D.C. It doesn't have to go to Sacramento. It stays.
Aren't there very different resources in different localities?
Yes, there are, but any time that you can cut government and any time you can make it more local, I think that's the better. And going back to your other question about representative, do you represent people as a whole, or how do you represent people? I think one of the great things is you represent your hometown district. Warren, I'm sure you've been to the State Assembly. I don't know how many of you have seen the floor of the State Assembly. You see a wide diversity. You see people from Eureka to the Central Valley to Oakland to San Francisco to Los Angeles to San Diego to Ventura County. I think that's representative within the state assembly, and I think you need to represent your ideas. And if your ideas match that of your district, you can represent roughly 400,000 people, and it's quite a responsibility. When I go up to Sacramento next year, every vote, I'm going to be thinking about those folks back in the district.
Yeah, but wait a minute, I want to let you off the hook on this issue of different resources in different localities, and if you're suggesting, it seems to me, a sort of every locality for itself a philosophy. What do you do when there are neighborhoods, if you want to put it that way, that don't have the resources to get their needs satisfied, as Jason put it?
Well, I would take a look at charities, or another thing that you can look at. I don't think
so. Non-governmental solutions is what you're
I would
saying?
look at non-governmental solutions. I don't think government's, as Ronald Reagan said, I don't think government's a solution. I think it's the problem in too many cases. And when people are doing well, they tend to give and charity. And I think you would look at the private sector as the best. If you look at McDonald's, if you look at Wendy's, if you look at a lot of the big corporations, Amgen's a big corporation in my district, they give to a lot of needy causes. And if I would leave it out of the government sector and leave it in the private sector.
All right, again, we're talking about the future. I know that you've talked about it in many ways. What about technology? What about the global economy and so on? And I know you have questions that you want to ask these panelists. So let me turn it over to you. And before we're done with this panel, I will try to ask all of them what it means or what it will mean to be a citizen in the 21st century in California. But first, let's go to the floor. Go ahead.
I wanted to kind of turn your question to Tony around Jason, and that is, but kind of then flip it, and that is certainly one of the things that the communities that need the services but don't have the resources can do is lobby and whatnot, say give us more services. But I kind of understood from the introduction that you're also interested in, especially the black male, but community activism, and I wish you'd talk more about that, how people in the community could or are acting to actually serve the community.
I've been asked to repeat the questions so that they can be recorded, and my understanding is what you're saying is what about the responsibility of the Jason's community, the folks that he's talking about, to serve their own needs. Okay, Jason, go ahead.
Oh, I absolutely agree with that. I think that, and we do have, at least particularly in my area, we have a lot of grassroots organizations that help to address needs, but there's only so far that you can go when you don't have the necessary resources. You can do as much as you can, but beyond that, then you have to call on, you have to call on either private organizations or our overall system of government to help out. So, no, I'm not saying that, and I'm not sure if that's what where you're going with the question, but I'm not at all saying that, there's a level of responsibility that, it needs to be shirked by our own communities. I think that, improvement in all communities has to start at the grassroots level. It has to start with those who are being, those who are suffering the problems. It has to start there. But when you reach, there's a certain point that you reach where you can go no further, and you need to have, if you don't have the resources, there's only a certain place, place you can go, and from there, I think that's when we ask, other parties to step in and lend support and resources, because when you're dealing with citizens, and everybody in this country is guaranteed certain rights and privileges, and if you're not getting your services, then I think that we have to call on our system of government to help out and raise you to those levels where you can be self-sufficient.
Could you give one example of the community serving its own needs?
Questioner asks for an example of the
Absolutely.
community serving its own needs.
Absolutely. You're talking about in my community. No, in my own community, we have actually in East Oakland, we have we have for a long time had a need for services such as banking, health services, because in our community we've had a lot of those things leave in the last 20 years. So we've actually had a core group of about 500 people come together about 3 or 4 years ago, and they envisioned a Family Life Center. And that Family Life Center was linked with one of our local churches. And so the church came together, pooled their resources, and so they're in the midst right now of constructing a Family Life Center that's going to combat educational issues in terms of after-school programs and also mentorship and tutorial programs. They've opened up a credit union already, which they envision as all part of this, because like I said, a lot of our banks left the East Oakland community also a while ago. They pulled those resources, and then at the same time, when they came together and envisioned this whole project, then we had governmental services come in and contribute dollars, placing them into the credit union. I believe something like $2 million, which of course helped get that off the ground. So I think that is an excellent example of where in communities where we have a lot of disenfranchised people, we had a lot of those folks come together and say, we're not just going to wait on a handout. We started the process going, and then we started the process. We had government, we had corporations like Clorox. Some of them fail me now, but there are about 5 corporations in Oakland that saw what we were doing in this community, and basically, came to help. And then when that happened, I also will say that the city of Oakland waived some of the developmental fees for the Family Life Center to get it going. And so that's a project that's going. It's going to be up in about 4 months, and then that's really going to be one of the core. It's going to be a catalyst for doing a lot of positive things in that community.
Let's go over to this side. Anybody got a question over in here? Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I want to ask about crime. Traditionally, we've always had a criminal class, but California has managed recently to see a huge increase of it, if the number of people we're locking up is in any indication of that. The politicians take great pride in being tough on crime. 3 strikes, you're out, lock them up, throw away the key, and so on. Do you think this is an idea that your generation is going to rethink, that they're going to throw away the sort of stereotypical approaches to crime and try to find new solutions to the problem of, what do you do about crime in society? And if so, what directions do you think that might go?
Okay, the question is this generation going to rethink the crime issues? I take it particularly as imprisonment of people for long periods of time with the resource commitment that requires is concerned. And you're asking everybody that question. Why don't I just go down the line? Tony, start out.
Well, I think that's a great question. I think the most essential role, I don't think government should be involved in too many things, but the most essential role of government is public safety. As a person who circulated petitions for 3 strikes and you're out, I think it was a good step in the right direction, because it's about 90 to 95% of the same criminals that commit the same crimes over and over again. And if we have a 3-strike system, the last study shows that most people on their 2nd strike leave the state of California and go to another area of the United States. And I say that's a great thing. And I just think we need to feel straight. The most essential role of government, if we don't feel safe in our schools and in our classrooms and in our streets and our businesses, everything else we talk about, we might as well not even talk about it, because that is the most essential role of government.
So you don't want to rethink that?
No, I think okay. 3 strikes is a step in the right direction. Let me give everybody a chance at this one, and then we'll get another question. Get as many as we can. So Linda, go ahead.
Well, I hope that we rethink that, because I don't think that locking up and throwing away the key is a solution to the crime problem in our state, and I don't want to be proud to divert the problem to another state. But I grew up in Inglewood, and if anyone knows Inglewood, people just know Inglewood by the rap songs, by the gang activity, the drug activity in the community, something I'm not proud of. But I saw a lot of my friends locked up. I saw a lot of them being shot by the Los Angeles Police Department, or I was there with the riots, and I saw those things happening in my community, and I didn't necessarily think that locking them up was the solution. I thought that maybe if we had something when we were younger, mentor programs, something to say that you are part of the society and we're not going to turn our backs on you, I think that would have helped a lot in my community. However, there are crimes that you just, what do you do? And it's a very complex issue. I don't think that that locking them up or the 3 strikes you're out is the right solution for such a complex issue, because there's some crimes that, what do you do? Sex offenders, what do you do with those?
So we need to rethink it, but you don't know exactly what the solution is now.
Right.
What alternative
solutions? From my
solutions
perspective,
there
I don't
might be.
think it works, but I think we do need to rethink it.
Patrick.
Yeah, I was one of the honorary chairmen, if you will, in Sacramento County at 3 strikes you're out. And yeah, what irritated me most, and I was running for office at a time when this issue came up, what irritated me the most is that individuals think that just because you take a position of saying, okay, look, if you're a repeat offender, and recognizing that we don't have a system of rehabilitation in our correctional system. We can talk about all you want. It's not there. It doesn't exist. We have problems spending money.
Should we have one?
Oh, sure. And
So we should rethink it to that extent.
well, I think you need to take it from the front end and the back end. And you have to realize that you need to be proactive on the front end, keeping children in school, investing in your recreation, in your after-school activities, helping at-risk children, approaching the problem of latchkey children, taking the front-end approach, but then also recognizing that when you have hardcore individuals that continually prey upon individuals, and not so much in where I live, but more so in the poorer neighborhoods, they need to be protected as much as a person who has a large home. And that's where I get a lot of my support, is from the people that are limited means, that feels that they're getting preyed upon on a daily basis from their own neighborhood. And they want some protection. Yes, they want services at the front end to help their children not fall into the correctional system. But they also want those that have been in and out of the correctional system to stay there.
Okay, Gloria?
My daughter and I were victims of a violent crime. And the perpetrator is in prison today, serving a 12-year sentence. I look at that and I think, is that where he belongs? Yes. Is that the answer to the problems? Do I feel any safer today on the streets? No. I do hope we rethink the issue of crime and punishment. And I wouldn't even say it's rethinking. It's really, again, to, these issues are out there, but again, to what's the majority will? What's the coalition that has come about? I do have hope that a new coalition can be built in California that will emphasize prevention, seek punishment where punishment is due, but really emphasize education, prevention. I mean, taking a look at the role of education and literacy and how it has to do with crime rates, the economy and jobs and crime, the media, because again, too, as somebody had earlier pointed out, the whole issue of, again, too, what's perpetuated out there. So I do hope that we have, and I do believe, I feel optimistic that we can get past 16 years of thinking, advocating my partisanship here, 16 years of thinking that you lock people up to solve crime. You don't solve crime by locking people up. I think we create other drains in the system. It is a way to deal with crime, but it is not the solution.
Jason, your final.
Okay, I would just say that I think that we do need to rethink our position on that, because it's, I think, like Ms. Romero just said, it's not an inhibitor. It hasn't stopped the rise of crime, the 3 strikes and you're out, laws such as that. So what's really important, I think, is education. And we as a society, we need to ask ourselves, why is it that crime is on the rise in California if we're, in fact, tough on crime? And I think you have to look at the fact that these, so-called criminals are coming from somewhere. They're being born. They start off as children, and then you have to ask yourself, are children born to be criminals? They're not. A child is a blank slate that is to be molded. So if you have a child that's born, and then you go to that child 15 or 16 years later, he's a criminal, then you have to ask yourself, why did that happen? And I think one of the reasons it happened is because we don't put the kind of resources that we need to into education, as well as attention into rehabilitation and prevention. So I think we need to have that sort of attention on, on those kinds of programs, and not look so much on things like 3 strikes you're out, because it doesn't work. I don't think that we will ever be able to build as many prisons as we will need to be able to build to house these people as we continue to move into the next century. I think right now we're going from not only talking about public institutions as prison, we're now at a place in California where we have to start looking at private industry to construct prisons, because we don't have enough, we don't even have the resources to build prisons, because voters will not, when you put something like that on the ballot, voters will not fund new constructions of prisons, because we all know, in our consciences that that is not the way for us to be going. So I would say that the focus really has to be on education and not on things like 3 strikes and you're out. And I'll just close, but I'll say that I picked up a newspaper article yesterday, and I was really blown away when I read that. And it said that under Governor Wilson's leadership, we had gone from a place where we were for every one African-American male in college, there were 3 in prison. And we've now gone to a place where for every 1 in college, there are 4 incarcerated. And his spokesperson, I think it was Sean Walsh, made the comment that he was being criticized by the media for that kind of a legacy. And then his comment was, well, that's a joke, because you're saying that if these 4 that were in prison were not in prison, they would be filling out admissions packets for University of California. But what he failed to realize was that if you take that criminal and go back 15 to 16 years when he was a first grader, yes, that the place where that kid was headed could possibly have been the University of California. But because you failed to fund the education in the way that kid needed, his only option right now is prison.
Okay.
Warren, can I add something?
Quickly, yeah, if you want.
Okay.
Sure.
First of all, I'd like to just interject that since 3 strikes has passed, we have the lowest crime rate since the 1950s. And second of all, defending my party's Governor Wilson, we spent more money on education than any other governor's gubernatorial office. We now, with Prop 98, and we spend over 50% of our general fund on education. So maybe, I don't agree with Sean Walsh's comment, but to look at the numbers, since 3 strikes, we have the lowest crime rate since the 1950s, and we have the K through 3 class size reduction that was passed by Governor Wilson, and we have spent more money on education than we have in a long time.
Okay, let's move on.
I'm sorry, if I could just
quick, if you
just,
will.
If
Any
I
one
could
of these
just
questions.
close with one comment. I would say
nighttime of debate.
I would just say that I'm on the budget committee for our district, and much of the money that we continue to receive is categorized money. We have absolutely no option. It has to go into specific programs. We have no control over spending, and many of those programs we have questions about whether or not they work, because we continue to be forced to spend money in these specific ways, and it's just, we don't even have the flexibility with monies that we have to address needs. And when you have a population as diverse as California, of course, one school district's needs is not going to be the same as another. So why are you giving us money and saying this is how that money is going to be spent, no other option? The needs of Oakland are going to be different than the needs of LA or Concord or Orinda or everywhere else. So I would just say that, I'll just say that's all.
Then you agree with my stance on local control.
You want to let that one go?
We can say that's why we oppose 227.
Okay, again, these are hour-long debate questions. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to pick up on exactly that theme. This is a conference about Proposition 13, and one of the major points of disagreement or hypothesis that was developed here is that if we've gotten the allocation of the property tax revenue out of the hands of the state legislature and back into the hands of local government, we wouldn't franchise people in local government to control their own fate and not have it in the hands of the certainty annual allocations from the Senate. Question is, are you comfortable with the notion of moving that money back to where it was prior to 1978? And if so, do you think that doesn't lead to an exposure of the very kind that's been identified? And how can we help out those disenfranchised populations that you're concerned about and bring them into the mainstream when in fact you'll be every time back up to your own bottom and you're taking the redistributive function out of way back against.
Okay, the question, and I'm not going to try to repeat it all, it goes back to the issue of Proposition 13 and the removal of the property tax as a source of revenue, or the drastic limitation of it to local government. What if the state were to give back that source of revenue to local governments? Wouldn't that just increase the inequities that we've been talking about, where some districts would be able to fund programs because they have a higher property tax or more valuable property, and others wouldn't? This time, let me start, Jason, with you and go down in the other direction.
I would say I'm not versed enough on Prop 13 to really speak to that right now. What I would say, I'd answer your question, is that something that I would be willing to reverse right now in order for that increase in funding? I would say no, because I think it's been in effect for such a long time. The adverse effect would just, the impact would just be too adverse on on our state to go back in that direction. I think we'd have to have some discussions about other alternatives that we'd be willing to look at in order to replace that sort of funding.
Okay, Gloria?
Again, too, I would follow on that and say that's what these conferences are for, in a sense, really to take a look at what are some of the alternatives. I don't necessarily think pre-Prop 13 California, if we're functioning in today's California, would be the answer overall, and I think there would be many inequities overall. But I believe that Prop 13, in terms of its impact on California today, has been injurious? Definitely. Do I want to automatically revert? Those, again, too, are some questions that I think we really do need to scrutinize, study, and come up with some alternatives to what, at least to what I think we find today and its hurtfulness in terms of funding for especially public education.
I think this kind of gets back to my opening statement, is that we currently have so many different forms of taxation, and most of it runs through the state. The state tells us what we can have and what we can't have, and changes their minds the next year and changes the source of funding. And then they tell us how to spend it, and then when it goes wrong, then they blame it on us. And it's a very frustrating system. I believe if you're going to have a program, you have to earmark a source of revenue for that program, and you need to then take a look at it and see how well it's functioning and how better can it function. But you can't get a real good picture when the game keeps changing every hour on the hour. And then to answer the last part of it, from an educational point of view, regardless of how we're funded, whether the chaos continues or there's some type of eventual clarification on funding, there has to be equalization within school districts within the state of California. So Roblo is not the same as Oakland, San Diego. You simply can't have property tax, I think, as a sole source of funding a district, which is why I think this whole state bond measure, and not so much the money in the bond measure, but the readjustments of how a district can get money to build a school, is a joke. They've tied our hands. They're expecting 50% matches in a lot of cases from districts that cannot generate that money, that don't have the tax base to generate that money, and yet have the deteriorating schools and the apartment complexes building and the settlement of new immigrants in there, and they can't address the problem because the approach is taken from inside the Capitol, from people viewing their district from the Capitol windows and not from inside the areas that are being impacted. There's not that reality check. That's why I think the revenue has to be.
Okay. So Linda, what about it?
Well, I definitely agree that we need to take a serious look at the issue. However, I'm not too familiar with what occurred pre-Prop 13. However, though, I have worked in elementary schools, and if we're going to base the allocation based on property taxes or property value, I'm very concerned with that, because the community that I was TAing for was a low-income community, and the property values were just not good ones. So I don't have a specific answer for the question, but I do know that we need to take a serious look at it.
Tony?
As you can see, most of us were pretty young when Prop 13 passed in 1978. But I think Prop 13 passed because the legislature failed to recognize the problems of the community. They did not know the revolt that was going out underneath them, and they did not represent that in Sacramento. That's actually what Hiram Johnson had in mind when he instilled the initiative process, is when the legislature doesn't get the job done in the will of the people, you take it through a revolt, get the signatures, and then pass it through initiative process. Too many times now we pay the initiative process, now we pay professional consultants to go get signatures. That's why you see so many propositions on the ballot these days, but back during Prop 13 days, it's really what Hiram Johnson envisioned when he brought in the initiative process. And I would leave as much money home as possible at the local level. Again, less government is better government, and government closest to people is best for the people. And I'm always for something that gives the taxpayers more of what they earn.
As David said, the conference is about Proposition 13, but this panel is about the future, and particularly about this issue of citizenship. So Linda Vasquez and Gloria Romero both have a plane to catch, and asked if they could possibly get out of here by 5:25. So it is now 5:20. Why don't I ask them first to address this issue of citizenship in the 21st century? What do you think it'll mean? How will it be different? from what it is today, and what do you anticipate? What sort of leadership do you hope to exert? And beyond what I've suggested, anything you'd like to add? So Linda Vasquez, we'll start with you.
What will it mean to be a citizen of California in the 21st century? I think that it's going to be very complex and very difficult to be a citizen. I know that in the magazine that I was reading, a lot of us are just faced with overwhelming societal problems, and we feel just resentful because some of these problems are not our fault, but what are we going to do? I think that specifically in California, the population is changing. I think we need to understand that, and I think we need to embrace the changes that our state is seeing, because from my perspective, a lot of the initiatives that I've seen on ballots for California voters have been one of, I think, wedge issues, and I think that demographics are changing, and these initiatives are definitely pitting people against each other, and I don't think that that's the solution for us as a society in California. I would really like to see that education is really looked at, and as a citizen, I think we should all really look at higher education, K through 12, and how we are funding the systems. I have a lot of notes here, but I think that I am concerned about the changes in population and the needs of the people not being met. I think that citizens will really have to take a step back and look at how California is changing and embrace that instead of fighting it.
Gloria Romero.
I think in looking at citizenship, again, we're looking at this, we'll see a continuation of the transformation. Final definition of citizenship, I don't think you ever really achieve, or a final form, but it is a continuing transformation. And I think it's really interesting to take a look at, you know, the immigrant becoming citizen only to be transformed in turn by the new immigrant who will then strive to become the citizen. And I think it is that continued cycle. I think what we'll certainly find in an early 21st century California is an impact on the political process, the social process, and a continuation of the impact on the economic process. I think we'll continue to find in this majority rule increased voter turnout of those who have been recently naturalized and who have become the new citizen. In fact, if I look at my own election in June, I can credit a good turnout rate of the new citizen, and I would say the anti-Pete Wilson voter turnout. Again, to whom do we begin to turn to have an impact on the political process? So we'll see participation rates, and again, too, in terms of looking at past policies that have really affected the immigrant, but now the citizen with children to take a look at, with families to build and neighborhoods to build. I think we'll see a very interesting voice in that political process. I think also, too, we'll see a citizen that will continue to exist as a two-tiered system in terms of the working poor, in terms of single-headed families headed by women, welfare mothers, in terms of the educational process of the incarcerated. We'll see a citizenry that certainly will be bombarded by the media and have access. We talk about the global citizen, and indeed we will be that, but I think the challenge will really be, will we participate? We'll be citizens, but will we participate? And then I think finally as well, too, we will begin to see challenges to how do we stretch citizenship? What does it mean? And this is an issue that's coming up in Los Angeles today as we talk about charter reform, the city of LA. There's been a call for the creation of elected neighborhood councils. There have been some who are opposed to the concept of the elected neighborhood councils because there are many residents in a community who are not citizens of this country, but yet who are residents who wish to participate. And I think we're going to begin to see, at least on the agenda for discussion, are similar discussions that we've seen in other states as to what is the definition of a citizen, and probably more so what I've heard more so, sort of that one right is voting. But under what conditions, under what types of elections might we allow the non-citizen to vote? In the educational arena, for example, where we have found in other states that this exists. This is a very controversial issue, and some people put it as the last vestige of what it means to be a citizen. But I do think that as we take a look at a transforming California in terms of labor unions, in terms of our neighborhoods, that we're going to find the parameters of citizenship being stretched, and I think it will be a healthy and very interesting debate.
We want you both to have an opportunity to catch your plane, and so let's give a hand to Linda Vasquez and Gloria Romero.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you. Keep in touch. Good luck.
We certainly aren't going to let our other panelists off the hook, though, on this issue of citizenship, and we've already gotten two very interesting answers. Let me go, Tony Strickland, to you. What do you think is going to be or what are the defining characteristics of citizenship going to be in California in the 21st century?
Well, Warren, I think that the 21st century is going to be no different than it has been throughout time. If you look back to the Mesopotamian Valley, to 1776, to every coffee shop and local diner inside your district, they're talking about two political parties. And I'm not talking about the Republicans and the Democrats. I'm talking about the party of freedom and liberty versus the party of government. Back in 1776, we threw out the kings and the party of government and created the party of liberty, to believe in representative government, giving people the power. That's going to be the challenge in the 21st century. Are we going to continue to be the party? And quite frankly, it doesn't cut across party lines. I could think of Assemblyman Bob Hertzberg, who's a Democrat from Van Nuys, worked with Tom McClintock on the Valley Breakup Bill, who believed in having people to have their self-determination. You look at Stephanie Connor, who's a Democrat, who wants to break up the Los Angeles massive overbloated bureaucracy of the LAUSD. I think that the 21st century is the same as it was back in the Mesopotamian Valley. There's two parties, and that's the party of liberty, people who believe in the freedom of individuals, or the party of government, people who believe in kings and government knows best.
Okay, let me go to Jason Hodge. What do you think about citizenship in the 21st century? How's it going to be different?
Well, I'm going to be optimistic about it. I think that I think I probably stated that earlier, that I have some concerns about the direction that we're going in, given some of the movement that we've had over the last 5 years with different initiatives and propositions. But I think that I'm very optimistic that we're going to come to a realization that we're going to have to be a society and a state that's going to have to address the needs of all of our citizens. And when you look at things such as numbers that say, as a result of one thing, you're going to have universities that only service about 7% of the population of the state. Obviously, under things such as 209, obviously those things are not going to be able to continue if we're going to be a society where we're working towards the social growth and the upliftment of all people. Like I said, I'm being optimistic, and I'm really believing that we're going to be, as we enter the 21st century, a society that we're going to have a focus on the forgotten. We're going to have to look at those communities that do not have the services that they need in order to basically function effectively, and say, we're going to have to start taking care of the needs of everybody so that we all can be a productive society. We're going to have to attack voter apathy, as we continue to move on, because we have, the face of California is changing, and the voices of every citizen is going to have to be heard in order for us to, again, like I said, this is a society where we're all basically in it together. And in order to do that, we got to reach out to all people, disenfranchised, for whatever the reasons, those who are don't feel welcome in the political process, or the process where you get what you need in order to live. We're going to have to reach out and have a collective dialogue and say, what are your needs? Let's address those needs so that we all can live in so that we all can coexist together. Because I just don't, at the present time, I just don't feel like, while we're all existing, I don't think that collectively we are coexisting, in a productive body. So, I don't want to repeat many of the themes that I talked about earlier, but just things like funding for education is going to have to be very important. And the prison industry, I've talked about that earlier. There's a lot of ills happening right now, and I just feel very, very optimistic that I think we're at a point where we're going to have a critical mass, and we're going to have to, really look at each other and dig deep within ourselves and say, what is it that's going to need to happen in order for us to address all these things? And I really feel like that's going to happen as we enter the 21st century, because, the last, I just want to give you my take, because I'm only 23 years old, and for as long as I can remember, it's kind of been going down. I don't remember the period where it was going up. So I just think that we're really at a point where things are going to have to start getting better, because kids coming up now, they deserve a lot better than the direction that we're headed in. And I think that we're at that point where we're going to have to make that turnaround.
Jason, thank you. Patrick?
Well, I'm a fair amount older, and I don't remember the times we're particularly going up either. And we come from different perspectives on some of the issues. I hate to leave it on a pessimistic note. I hope you can maybe uplift at the end.
I'm the moderator.
I know, but that's your job, is to give that extra little oomph there and make everyone leave happy. You know, I am a little bit more pessimistic. I started out very optimistic, very proactive, very progressive oriented, and really working in the communities and the grassroots, and trying to get people to come out and to take charge of their lives and as individuals and neighbors. And I think being a citizen of the 21st century means, in order for a successful, optimistic 21st century, you have to be proactive in your household, in your neighborhood, and in your community. We have talked in years past about being a throwaway society when it comes to consumerism. You know, now we're into recycling, all those good things. But we don't recycle neighborhoods. You have some large cities, San Francisco, San Diego, Sacramento, that invest in their downtown core. They have the ability, they have the corporate connections. But in Fresno and Modesto and Stockton, you're seeing a deterioration of the downtown cores. And in San Francisco, maybe not San Francisco, I'll step aside now, LA, San Diego, Sacramento, you're seeing disposable suburbs. Those who are fed up, do not feel they can affect change and have the ability to move, until such time that the problems catch up to them and then they move again. And those of us that cannot afford to move or have a conscience for the neighborhood are willing to fight and say, okay, our neighborhood's in a transition state, we're not walking away, we're going to turn this neighborhood around and make it a livable neighborhood for our families. That's when you have a good citizen, and that's when you become optimistic, because then you can affect local government and then state government and national government. You cannot change state government until you're willing to become proactive in your own neighborhoods. Otherwise, you're simply driven and you're caught up into the special interest mode, and that's why I'm so pessimistic right now. But it can happen, and I'm going to keep fighting the fight. I'm a little tired right now, but soon I'll be rejuvenated, and I'll go out there and I'll start fighting the fight some more.
Warren, I can end on a positive note.
Well,
I think things are.
Briefly, though.
Oh, very brief.
Yeah.
I think things are great. And look, this is the new generation right here, and we might disagree on some issues, but we all care, and we're all going to be involved for a very long time.
I was going to say, as the dinosaur on the panel, I am very impressed by the thoughtfulness and the candidness and the responsiveness and the basic seriousness and good citizenship of all of the panelists that we've heard today. They've been a great group, and thanks. Join me, if you will, in thanking them for their effort.